I'm 62 years old, and if you had told me 4 years ago that falling in love again would nearly cost me the bakery business I spent 27 years building from nothing, I would have said you were out of your mind. I was careful. I was smart. I had survived a divorce, a recession, 2 kitchen fires, and a global pandemic that shut my doors for 4 months. I didn't survive all of that to lose everything to a man with a nice smile and 3 very ambitious adult children. But that's almost exactly what happened. And the only reason I still own Hartwell's, my 3 café-bakeries, my commercial kitchen, my brand, my everything, is because of one decision I made before I ever said, I do. I never told my second husband or his children that the buildings we operated out of were mine. Not leased, not shared, not complicated. Mine. Every square foot, every mortgage I'd paid off, every lease I'd negotiated, all mine. Let me start at the beginning. My name is June Hartwell. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, grew up in a family where my grandmother baked bread every single morning before sunrise, and I learned to make pie crust before I learned to ride a bike. I married young, 23, to a man named Dale who was handsome and funny and completely unsuited for the kind of life I wanted. We lasted 9 years. When we divorced, I was 32. I had a 7-year-old daughter named Cassie, and I had about $14,000 in savings and a lease on a tiny 800 square foot space on Meriwether Street in downtown Asheville. I opened my first cafe bakery with those $14,000 and every favor I could call in. My mother watched Cassie while I worked doubles. My brother helped me build the countertops. I sold out of everything I made on day one and cried in the parking lot afterward because I knew somehow I was going to be okay. 27 years later, Hartwell's had grown into 3 locations. The original on Meriwether, still the flagship. A second location I opened in 2008. Terrible timing in retrospect, but we survived. And a third in the River Arts District that I opened in 2019, right before the world fell apart. All 3 buildings were owned outright in my name. No partners, no investors, no debt. The business itself had annual revenue just north of $2 million, and the real estate alone was worth close to $4 million by any reasonable appraisal. I wasn't wealthy in the way people with inherited money are wealthy. I was wealthy in the way that people who have worked every day of their adult lives can become, quietly, incrementally, with nothing handed to them. Cassie had gone to UNC Greensboro, gotten a degree in graphic design, and was building her own life in Raleigh. She came home for holidays and summers, and she'd help me redesign the Hartwell's logo and packaging, and that was the extent of her involvement in the business. She had her own dreams, and I supported them completely. And I was lonely. I won't pretend otherwise. When you spend your 50s working 14-hour days and suddenly the business is running well and your daughter is gone and the house is too quiet, something shifts. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't falling apart. I was just a 59-year-old woman who had everything she'd ever worked for and no one to share it with. That's when I met Thomas at a Chamber of Commerce event in Asheville in the fall of 2020. He was 64, widowed 2 years prior, semi-retired after selling a regional accounting firm he built over 30 years. He had kind eyes, a dry sense of humor, and he knew exactly what it felt like to build something from nothing and watch it grow. We talked for 2 hours at that event and didn't notice when everyone else left. Here's what I didn't know then. Later, I would find out that Thomas had done his homework on me before that chamber event. He'd looked me up. He knew about the 3 locations. He knew about the real estate holdings. He'd asked around about Hartwell's before we ever coincidentally ended up at the same table. That is information I did not have when I was falling in love with him over the next 18 months. What I did have from the beginning was instinct. Some quiet, stubborn part of me that had spent 3 decades protecting something I'd built alone kept its guard up even when the rest of me was happy. When Thomas started asking questions about the business, curious questions, affectionate questions, the kind a supportive partner asks, I found myself giving vague answers without quite knowing why. The buildings are complicated, I'd say. There are some partnership structures I'm still working through with my attorney. He'd nod, move on, and I'd feel a small, strange relief. I told myself I was just being private, just old habits from running a business alone for so long. But the instinct knew something my heart didn't yet. We got engaged in March of 2021. Thomas proposed at the Merriweather location after closing time, with the lights down low and a bottle of good champagne and a ring that was genuinely beautiful. I said yes, I meant it. His children came to visit 3 weeks later. He had 3. Marcus was 41 and worked in commercial real estate. Serena was 38, a contracts attorney. And his youngest, a son named Grant, was 33 and described himself as a business development consultant, which I would later understand to mean he looked for opportunities to move money around in ways that benefited himself. They came on a Sunday, all 3 of them, for brunch at the Merriweather location. I had the staff set up a nice table. I baked myself. I wanted to make a good impression. Within 40 minutes, Marcus had asked me about the square footage of the Merriweather building, the lease terms on all 3 locations, whether I owned or rented the commercial kitchen equipment, and what the cap rate on River Arts looked like in the current market. I remember setting down my coffee cup very carefully. "It's a family operation," I said. 27 years of figuring it out as I go. I tried not to get too deep in the numbers at Sunday brunch. He smiled. "Of course, I just think it's such an impressive portfolio." "Dad's mentioned you're the sole operator. That's rare. Most people your age are thinking about succession planning." "Most people my age." I was 59. Serena was more polished about it. She asked whether I had a business attorney, and when I said yes, she mentioned she'd be happy to look over any operating agreements as a favor, just to make sure everything was structured optimally. "Tax efficiency matters so much at this scale," she said, "and with a marriage there are implications worth thinking through." Grant said almost nothing during brunch. He just looked around the space the way you look at something you're considering buying. Thomas, for his part, squeezed my hand when I caught his eye. "They're just excited," he said quietly. "They want to know you." That evening, I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia. She's been my business attorney for 15 years, and the only reason I am sitting here today with anything to show for myself. I told her about the brunch. I told her about the questions. I told her that his daughter was a contracts attorney and his oldest son was in commercial real estate. She was quiet for a moment. "June," she said, "tell me you're doing a prenup." "Already on my list," I said. "Good. And listen. I want you to be careful about how much you disclose before that prenup is signed. Actually, even after. You have the right to keep your asset structure private. You don't owe anyone a balance sheet. I already knew that. But it helped to hear it said out loud. The prenup is clear, thorough, and non-negotiable. Everything acquired before the marriage stayed mine. The businesses, the real estate, all of it. Thomas signed it without a scene, which I took as a good sign at the time. He said he understood completely that he wasn't marrying me from my bakeries, and I believed him. What I did not tell Thomas, and what I still had not told his children, was the actual structure of my ownership. They believed, based on my deliberately vague answers, that the Hartwell's locations were a mix of leased and cooperatively held property, that there might be silent investors involved, that the whole thing was messier and less clear-cut than it looked. I let them believe that. Something told me to. That instinct saved my life. We got married in September of 2021. Small ceremony, beautiful day. My daughter Cassie is standing beside me with tears running down her face because she was happy, not because she was worried, though she did ask me the night before whether I was sure. "They seem very interested in your buildings, Mom," she said. "I have a prenup," I told her, "and I have Patricia." "Okay," she said, but she held my hand a little longer than usual. The first year was genuinely good. Thomas was good company. He knew how to be present without being intrusive. He cooked dinner when I worked late. He came to the Merriweather location on Saturday mornings and sat at the corner table with his coffee and his newspaper and never got in the way. He seemed content. Then, about 14 months in, things began to shift. It started small. Grant came to visit alone one weekend and asked if he could take a look at the operational flow. Just from a workflow perspective, I do this for businesses all the time. I told him the operations were running well and I wasn't looking for a consultant. I'm not charging you, he said, laughing. I'm family. I know, I said, and I appreciate that, but I have a team I trust. His smile didn't change, but his eyes did. 2 weeks later, Serena called to tell me she'd been thinking about my estate planning and she wanted to recommend an attorney she trusted to help me restructure for longevity. I already had an estate plan. I told her so. Yours may not account for your new marital status, she said. Things change when you're married. There are protections Thomas might need too. I thanked her and called Patricia the same afternoon. Then Marcus started showing up at the River Arts location and asking the staff questions. One of my managers called me to say a man had been asking about the building's ownership records, how long we'd had the location, whether there'd been any recent appraisals. I knew immediately who it was, and Thomas. Thomas started sliding things across the kitchen table with a gentle voice and a patient expression. This is just a financial power of attorney, he said one evening. Standard. Everyone should have one. It's responsible. I read it top to bottom. It would have given him the legal authority to conduct real estate transactions on my behalf. Thomas, I'm not signing this. It's just a precaution. It's a real estate transaction document. I'm not signing it. He was cold for 4 days. When he came back warm, I was already somewhere I couldn't come back from. I called an investigator I'd used years ago during a dispute with a contractor who tried to overbill me on the River Arts build-out. His name is Dennis. He's thorough, discreet, and expensive. I told him I needed everything he could find on Thomas Whitmore. Everything. His financial history, his late wife, his children, and specifically whether there'd ever been any disputes over property or estate matters. It took him 3 weeks. His late wife, Beverly, had died 3 years before we met. She'd owned a home in Brevard worth approximately $900,000 and had a retirement portfolio of roughly $600,000. 18 months before her death, she had transferred the house into a joint trust with Thomas. 8 months before she died, the retirement accounts had been restructured with Thomas as primary beneficiary. Beverly had been in the early stages of cognitive decline during that period. Her sister had contacted an elder law attorney after Beverly's death, but ultimately hadn't pursued the matter. The settlement had reportedly included a confidentiality clause. There was more. Serena had been sanctioned by the North Carolina State Bar 3 years ago over a conflict of interest complaint. The case had been quietly resolved, but it was on record. Marcus had been named in a civil suit by a former real estate client who claimed misrepresentation. It had settled out of court. Grant had been terminated from 2 previous consulting arrangements under undisclosed circumstances. Dennis looked at me across the table at the coffee shop where we met. He laid the file out neatly, the way people do when they want you to understand the weight of it. June, he said. This man identified you as a target before he ever met you. The chamber event wasn't a coincidence. He was introduced to your profile. 3 properties, sole ownership, widow demographic, no business partner. And he made a plan. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the sunset at Merriweather the night he proposed. I thought about the newspaper at the corner table on Saturday mornings. I thought about how convincingly he played the role. What do? I asked. You call your attorney, he said, and you don't let him know that you know. I went back to Patricia that same week. I told her everything. We went through every document I'd been asked to sign. We ran a title search on all 3 properties. Nothing had been altered. The attempted filings hadn't happened yet, or hadn't succeeded, but we found something troubling. An inquiry had been made with the county assessor's office about the ownership structure of the Merriweather building. The inquiry had come from a business address registered to Serena's law firm. They were mapping what they had to work with. Patricia brought in a forensic accountant. We went through 3 years of financial records, looking for any unauthorized access, any attempted transfers, anything that might constitute a legal basis for action. We found email exchanges, subpoenaed later, in which Marcus, Serena, and Grant discussed what they called the Hartwell position and how to accelerate the restructuring conversation before the prenup window closes. There was a discussion about whether I could be persuaded to voluntarily add Thomas to the property deeds as a gesture of trust. And there was one email from Serena to Grant that I still think about. It said she's smart, but she's lonely. That's the lever. I read that and I felt something go very still inside me. She was right. I had been lonely, and I had been smart enough to know that being lonely was the thing I needed to protect myself against. I didn't confront Thomas immediately. I spent 6 weeks helping Patricia build a case with the district attorney's office. Beverly's sister agreed to cooperate. The elder law attorney she'd consulted provided a sworn statement. We had the emails. We had the title inquiry. We had the unsigned documents Thomas had tried to get me to execute. We had Dennis's full investigation. And then I planned a dinner. I told Thomas I wanted to have a celebration. His birthday was coming up, and I thought it would be nice to have the family together at the Merriweather location after closing. All 3 of his children, Cassie and her partner, a few friends. He was delighted. He thought it meant I was warming to the idea of family. I had the space set beautifully. Good wine. The best things from the case. Tables on the patio under the string lights. It looked like a celebration because it was supposed to. Thomas, Marcus, Serena, and Grant arrived together, dressed nicely, already smiling. Cassie arrived with her partner and gave me a long look when she came in because I'd briefed her that morning and she was holding herself together with both hands. Then my other guests arrived. Patricia, Dennis, Detective Rhonda Caldwell from the Financial Crimes Unit of the Asheville Police Department, and 2 women. Thomas was not expecting. Beverly's sister, a woman named Joan, not from my list, a real name from a real story, and an elder law advocate named Dr. Faye Monroe, who had worked Beverly's case 3 years ago. Thomas saw them walk through the door and stopped moving. "What is this?" he said. "It's your birthday dinner," I said, "and I wanted the whole family here." Marcus stood up. "We're leaving." "You're not going anywhere," Detective Caldwell said. She said it the way people say things when they mean them completely. Serena went pale. Grant looked at the exit. I stood at the head of the table, in my building, in the business I had built from $14,000 and 30 years of getting up before dawn, and I looked at each of them. "I want to ask you something," I said. "Did you ever, at any point, think about what it took to build this? Not the numbers, not the cap rate, not the ownership structure. Did you ever think about what it means to open a door at 5 in the morning in January when the heat hasn't kicked in yet and start baking because people are going to come and you want to have something worth coming for? Did you ever think about what it costs to do that for 27 years? Thomas opened his mouth. "Don't," I said. "I already know the answer." Patricia stepped forward with the file. She went through the documents Thomas had tried to get me to sign. She presented the emails discussing the Hartwell position. She introduced Beverly's sister, who had a statement to read. When Joan read it, Serena stopped looking pale and started looking sick. Detective Caldwell made the arrests. Marcus and Serena were taken into custody for conspiracy and attempted financial fraud. Grant cooperated on the spot. He had the look of someone who had always suspected this moment might come and had been quietly preparing his exit. Thomas was arrested last, and as they walked him out through the door of my bakery, through the place I had built, he turned and looked at me. "I did love you," he said, and I believed him, actually. I think he was capable of both things at once, the affection and the plan. Some people are. That might be the most dangerous kind. "I know," I said, "but you love this more." I gestured at the room, the pressed tin ceiling, the worn oak floors, the cases I'd filled myself 10,000 times. And it was never going to be yours. The criminal case moved through the system over the following year. Marcus and Serena each pleaded to reduce charges, conspiracy to commit fraud, and received suspended sentences, probation, and significant fines. They are both barred from working in their respective licensed professions for 5 years. Grant testified for the prosecution and received immunity. The investigation into Beverly's estate was reopened. I don't know yet how it resolved, but Joan told me last spring that she finally felt heard. Thomas went to trial. He was convicted of elder financial abuse. The statute applies even in attempted cases in North Carolina, as well as fraud and conspiracy. His prior conduct with Beverly was admitted as pattern evidence. He received 8 years. He's 66 now. He'll be in his early 70s when he gets out. The divorce was finalized 4 months after the arrests. The prenup held completely. He received nothing. His legal fees consumed what remained of his retirement accounts. I still have Hartwell's. All 3 locations. The Merriweather Building, the second on Lexington, the River Arts space, with the tall windows I have loved since the day I signed those papers. I still get there before sunrise on most mornings. I still bake when I need to think. The staff threw me a party when the verdict came in, which embarrassed me and moved me in equal measure. Cassie decided to come back to Asheville, not to run the business, she's still doing her design work, but to be nearby. She sits at the corner table on Saturday mornings now, where Thomas used to sit with her laptop and her coffee and the easy quiet of someone who knows their home. My manager of 12 years, a woman named Beverly, different Beverly, my Beverly, cried when I told her the whole story. I knew something was wrong, she said. I just didn't know how to say it. I told her she could always say it. She always could have. I never planned to remarry. Not because I've given up on the idea of love, but because I've learned something about myself. I am better at protecting what I've built than I am at trusting people who appear after it's built. That's not a tragedy, that's just honest self-knowledge. I tell this story because there are women out there, and men too, honestly, but mostly women, who have spent their lives building something real and quiet and solid, and who get to a certain age and think the danger is behind them. The mortgage is paid off, the business is stable. The hard part is done. The hard part is never done. Someone will always be looking for a lever, a way in, a story about love that is also a story about access. And if you have spent your life building, you know something in your bones that you sometimes forget when you're lonely. The thing you built is yours, not because of paperwork, though the paperwork matters, not because of a prenup, though the prenup saved me, but because of every morning you got up and built it, every decision, every risk, every 5 o'clock in January when the heat hadn't kicked in yet. That is not transferable. It is not signable. It is not signable. It is not something anyone can take, even when they spend 2 years trying. Here is what I want you to take from this. If you're listening, run the background check before you fall in love. I didn't, and I got lucky. Beverly, the first Beverly, didn't run it, and she lost everything. The $500 you spend on an investigator before a wedding is not a failure of trust. It is the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the person you want to trust. Keep some things close. The full picture of your finances, your asset structure, your ownership documents. You don't owe that to someone you've known for 8 months. You don't owe it to someone you've known for 3 years. You share that information when you are certain, and you stay uncertain longer than feels comfortable. Uncertainty is protective. Certainty can be manufactured by someone who knows how to build it. Listen to the instinct that makes you give vague answers. That instinct is the part of you that built something. It knows the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you have. Sometimes it knows before your heart does. And if someone ever asks you to sign a document you don't fully understand, in the context of a relationship where love is supposed to be the operating principle, the answer is no. The answer is always no until you've had it reviewed by someone who works for you and only you. I'm 62 years old, and I wake up every morning in a house I own outright and walk to a bakery I have owned for 27 years, and I make things that people come from across the city to eat. That is my life. That is what I built. It belongs to me. And anyone who wants to change that is going to find out exactly what I'm made of. I used to think that what I built was just a business. 3 cafés, some real estate, a brand with 27 years of early mornings behind it. But sitting here now, on the other side of everything that happened with Thomas and his children, I understand it was never just that. What I built was proof. Proof that a woman alone with $14,000 and a 7-year-old and a borrowed countertop could create something lasting. And the reason I almost lost it wasn't greed, mine or theirs. It was something quieter and more dangerous than greed. It was the belief that being loved meant being safe. That belief is a lie. Not because love is false, but because love and safety are two entirely different things, and confusing them is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Thomas was capable of affection. I believe that still. But he was also capable of a plan, and he had been running the plan since before we ever met. The cause of what happened wasn't my loneliness, even though Serena correctly identified it as the lever. The cause was that Thomas made choices, deliberate, calculated choices, over months and years. His children made choices, and those choices had consequences they didn't anticipate because they underestimated what 27 years of building something from nothing actually produces in a person. It produces Patricia, the attorney who has your back because you treated her with respect for 15 years. It produces Dennis, the investigator who picked up the phone because you paid him fairly and spoke to him like a human being. It produces a manager like my Beverly who noticed something was wrong even when she couldn't name it because you built a workplace where people pay attention and care what happens. Everything I had built, the relationships, the reputation, the paper trail of integrity, that was what protected me in the end. Not cleverness, not luck. The slow accumulation of doing right by people over a very long time. That's the thing about consequences. They move in both directions. Thomas spent years cultivating a persona of trustworthiness, and it unraveled in a single evening because the real accumulation, the real record, was underneath. Beverly's sister had been waiting 3 years to be believed. Dr. Monroe had documentation she'd never been able to use. The emails existed because Marcus and Serena were arrogant enough to think they would never be subpoenaed. Every shortcut they took, every corner they cut, every person they underestimated, it all came due at once. I think about the morning after the arrest, walking into Merriweather at 5 o'clock, turning on the lights, starting the ovens. The flour was where it always was. The mixers were where they always were. Nothing about that room had changed. And I stood there for a moment and understood something I want to pass on to anyone who is in the middle of something hard right now. The thing you build with your own hands and your own integrity has a kind of permanence that cannot be forged and cannot be stolen. People can try. They can file papers and send emails and slide documents across kitchen tables with gentle voices. But they cannot manufacture what you actually are. And eventually, what you actually are is the only thing that matters. Cassie sits at the corner table on Saturday mornings now. I watch her sometimes when I come out from the kitchen. She has her coffee and her laptop and that particular ease of someone who knows where home is. I built that for her without knowing I was building it. That's the part no one ever talks about, that when you protect what's yours, you protect what's theirs too. Every act of integrity compounds. Every morning you get up and do the right thing is a deposit into something that pays out in ways you will not be able to predict or plan for. I am 62 years old. I wake up in a house that is mine and walk to a bakery that is mine, and I am not lonely in the way I was before, because I am finally keeping my own company well. That is enough. That has always been enough.